All right. I am having a conversation. You're in Toronto, right,
I'm
Victor?
in Ottawa.
Ottawa, I beg your pardon, the capital of great Canada. Victor Herbiet in Ottawa, Canada, composer, Canadian composer, and classical saxophonist. We are going to be talking about his 2018 Centre Disc. It's a Canadian label. I'll put it all up at performingartsreview.net here when we're done with the interview. The interview will go up, samples, all the good stuff for people to browse and have a good time getting to know who Victor Herbiet is. We're talking about his 2018 CD release called The Road to the Ethereal Gate. And Vers la porte éthérique. I hope I got close.
Oh yeah.
And when you first sent me this CD, I thought to myself, what is with these people, these composers and these producers of CDs, that they come up with these extensively exotic and Freudian titles? Of course, I know now, having listened to the CD, and we're going to speak about that ethereal gate and the vehicle by which one might pass. Yeah. Don't worry, everybody. We'll get it all clear in a bit. But this is a CD with your compatriots, violinists. We'll mention names. A clarinetist, yourself on saxophone, and a wonderful pianist. We'll get to those names. But first, I guess we better figure out who you are. You studied composition with Stephen Gelman at the University of Ottawa. BA Master's degree, saxophone performance, currently adjunct professor at the School of Music at the University of Ottawa. Why didn't I read that 3 seconds before I asked if you were in Toronto? And joining Victor Herbiet on this beautiful, masterful CD. I'm talking about the art that you have created as a composer. That's what I'm talking about. Masterful, masterful composition. Our pianist Frédéric Lacroix, I can never get that right. Clarinetist Kimball Sykes, who is principal of the National Arts Center Orchestra, and violinist Mark. Here's a tough one. Jokic.
That's right. That's
Ah!
right.
It pays to read the New York Times. It really does. During all the troubles when Yugoslavia split up, I at least knew that any IC word had to be itch. All right. And we're going to talk about something else, which is we've spoken off camera, that you use extensively in this CD, and we don't want to scare people away at all. But you apparently Victor, have a real it's not an obsession, but it's like the candy of choice compositionally for you is this thing about the 12-tone row system.
Yeah.
And I can tell everyone right this minute, do not run away. Do not be fearful. I have never heard the idea, and it's been a long time since my undergraduate days, but I too thought, 12-tone row, oh my God, this is going to, dissonance came to mind immediately. I had no idea the subtlety of how one can use rows. Why don't we start there? First of all, this CD is full of rows, correct? Are some
That's
pieces
correct.
free? Okay.
There's a lot.
Okay, good. And also, maybe I'm the fool here, but I would never have guessed it in a million years that there were structures of that complexity in these pieces, because they're so accessible, they're so gorgeous and so wonderful. So tell us, please, a little bit about who turned you on to 12-tone row technique, and how come you like it so much, apparently.
Well, I think 12 tone row, I see it as a tool. Like, say you see the vertical axis of music as harmony and the horizontal axis as counterpoint. There can be another kind of dimension, another tool in the toolbox that could be 12 tone. It could be something you add to it. And one of the reasons I started using it is that I felt it was so underused that it would ensure originality in my works. Because sometimes you hear something and it's like, oh, maybe I'm copying someone. But if you're using 12 tone, usually it's something pretty original you're putting out there.
Very interesting idea. In other words, there's a sort of fingerprint that you can't
Yeah.
avoid. Yeah. Oh, continue,
But then
please.
I found in some ways a strict 12 tone approach was kind of limiting what I wanted to say. So I take liberties with it. I use it for theme construction. There's actually 12 tone in the first track of the CD. tango à trois. There's the main lick is a 12-tone lick, but that's where I leave it. And under that, it's just a jazz kind of progression and some kind of improvisational kind of licks. But there's one line of 12-tone in there, but I didn't find I needed to go deeper into it. I just needed that little bit of spice of originality. There's so many tangos written out there, but I don't think there's one with the 12-tone lick as the main theme.
Yeah, and by the way, little did I know, I fell right into you. You know, you composers are so sneaky. You do so much. You hide things. You let people discover secrets and messages and fragments and so on. I find it absolutely fascinating and overwhelming because I fell right in. I heard the most magnificent, stunning, wonderful tango. That's what I heard. And you have just told me that the row is right there in the very beginning. The whole 12-tone row is expressed somehow in the very beginning notes even. Yeah?
Oh, yeah. It's right at the end of the piano introduction. It goes da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's 12 notes. And with the pickup into the next line, that's the row. That's 12 tones.
I'm just going to slip down here and see what I had to say about it in my notes on this piece. And this is, by the way, tango trois,
Yep.
excuse me, violin, saxophone, and piano. Composed in 2006. I think this is the earliest on the CD of your works.
Yes.
Yeah. Inspired, of course, by Piazzolla. You have all that technique, all that wonderful homage to the tango style. And as I see in my notes, is that there was no hint to me that there was a row there. So I guess it's congratulations, because as an undergrad, I remember being terrified by the whole thing and totally turned off by 12-row stuff. So.
But it's just a dash. I use it just as a little tool in ensure originality. But the whole it's very tonal in harmony. It's just a little dash in the melody. It's like, oh yeah, we can put a little 12-tone in there and make sure that Piazzolla didn't write that one himself, because I've heard so many of them. It's sometimes in your subconscious you start writing other people's music, and I'm kind of terrified of that.
Aha. Okay, so there's a Freudian problem. We'll We will not discuss that. No, I'm just kidding. Well, very, very impressive compositionally, just the CD in general. So we talked, but I don't think you told me when and how did 12-tone, the whole data cacophony come into your head? You know.
Well, I went to a very strong arts high school in Ottawa where we did a lot of music theory, and at the end, we kind of did an overview of 12-tone music, and I was fascinated how mathematically the whole thing worked, but it kind of stayed there. I never really used the matrix extensively in high school, and for my first couple of years of undergrad, I didn't write any music at all. And when I started writing music, I said, well, okay, if I want this to be original and sound modern, I'll start exploring this 12-tone system. And I did a few attempts, some of which I enjoyed more. I wrote a sonata for alto saxophone and piano, which has a lot more 12-tone in it, but I did not record it for this CD. There's a recording online where it's much, much heavier on the 12-tone. And after that work, I started getting a little lighter on it, and then I figured out, is it in my style, I can just put a little dash of it here and use it to construct themes, but not necessarily to construct a whole piece and stick to the whole system, because harmony and counterpoint is still fun.
Well, and not only that, you mentioned in your liner notes that this is your way of you've come upon this highly intelligent, wonderful, and sophisticated and entertaining way of using this concept, this 12-row concept, and creating your own individual sound. I mean, your own style of composition. It's utterly unique. And it had never occurred to me that in a way the row is a stamp. You know what I mean? Sort of like yum da da dum, sort of like Rachmaninoff in a way, that each piece has its stamp that says, yeah, this is me. This is not Piazzolla. Pay attention, everybody. You know, very, very interesting. And listening to this CD, man. So much beautiful music. It's all your music. We want to make everyone clear. It's all your music as a composer, and then of course you're a master saxophonist. Wonderful performances. But this CD in particular reminded me of what a gorgeous instrument the saxophone is. How beautifully like the human voice. You match it so well with clarinet and in another piece that we might have time to get to that's on the CD. But I've never quite understood what happened, what went wrong, what went bad, and is it coming? You know what I mean? The saxophone was kind of kicked out the back door of orchestral music, with the exception of one or two composers, Bizet and so on, and hasn't, or has it come back into the use that it deserves?
Well, the invention of the instrument happened around 1840, 1841. There was kind of more stable prototype. But that was late. I mean, Beethoven was long gone. Sure. A lot of the masterworks had already been written, and the general consensus on orchestrating was done. You know, orchestration from Beethoven to Brahms and even into Tchaikovsky. You know, they argued that winds should be by pairs. Sometimes you add a couple, four horns. Orchestration was kind of standard, and the composers wrote for the orchestras that were in their town, and the orchestras that were in their town had this set number of professionals. And saxophone being a later instrument, there were far less masters of the instrument, and also it wasn't in the orchestration, like typical orchestration, and there was a time where it was hard to find a spot for it. Like where does it go? Do you put it as an extra clarinet? And eventually Prokofiev does that. He uses tenor sax as like an extra clarinet beside the bass clarinet, as another kind of single reed sound to it. Other composers will use it as a solo instrument. In Bizet's Arlésienne, it's just like alto has its own voice. Gershwin uses it as a section, but there seems to be not have been a consensus on exactly how to use the instrument. And then it was the 20th century, and all the master rep was written.
Yeah, and but also you remind me of a little something about how when things get set in their ways, it's very hard to change. I'm thinking of, had a conversation with some Baroque performers, and the idea that Baroque repertoire, the performers of Baroque repertoire in the 1940s and 1950s is just all wrong, basically. It's all late Romantic, and it's simply because the habit began and nobody made much correction or even wanted to bother. It's kind of like the saxophone kind of could not find its place because people didn't even want to give it some further thought. So actually my hat is tipped to Bizet, even more earnestness. He saw it, he picked it up, he made gorgeous use of the instrument in l'Arlésienne. And also jazz musicians. They're sitting there at the bar and they go, hey, this is good, and let's take this one. Yeah, something like that.
Oh, yeah, the saxophone has a really natural projection to it. So at the time, with louder instruments like drums and trumpet, and the saxophone, compared to the clarinet that was in earlier jazz bands, saxophone section has a much louder potential, much broader dynamic range. So it really found its way into noisy clubs.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, it's amazing how these things happen. Quite fascinating.
Yeah, you can just drown out a lot of noise with this naturally amplified conical instrument.
And then, of course, all the prejudices in the classical world kicked in, and it's like, that's a lowly, a bordello instrument, something like that. Attitude. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly how that happened. I know for a time, saxophone was used in the orchestra as the voice of the common person.
Ah.
It's the voice of the common man. Some composers see saxophone as that. But in orchestra repertoire, there's a lot of really lovely melodies, like the Rachmaninoff symphonic dances, Bizet's Arlésienne, Bolero. It's lovely, well-written music for saxophone. So I really don't think these composers were seeing it necessarily as a jazz-specific instrument.
Yeah.
I think they really did see a good potential, melodic potential for the instrument.
I want to touch on a couple of pieces on the CD, but I think it's time for me to re-emphasize that really the part and parcel of the point of my having such great conversations with musicians is to point out to other musicians, whom I hope are watching, incredible repertoire. And this CD is just amazing, fresh, new repertoire as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sure many people, musicians who are looking for repertoire are going to be fascinated to have a look and listen to this CD. And again, you employ fiddle, clarinet, sax, piano, and an instrument where I'm not trying to be too mysterious because we have to get to it, but I just want to look at, I'm going to point out one in particular piece that blew my brains out. I use that expression probably too often, but this has been the experience of being introduced to so many wonderful people out there in the world, including yourself. I'm speaking of the Hommage à Debussy, this rhapsody for clarinet, saxophone, and piano. Why don't I, by the way, it's a masterpiece. It's absolutely stunning from beginning to end, and I've said it before, and it's hard to describe it. When something absolutely makes sense compositionally, you know it right away, and that's kind of where my radar goes off. If it just makes perfect sense, and that is, by the way, all of the music on this CD makes perfect sense. It's fabulous compositionally. Let's just talk about the Hommage à Debussy, because there is a little story there. Tell me about it.
So I think back in 2012, a good friend of mine, a piano player, Jean Desmarais, he was organizing a concert to celebrate, I think, 150 years of the birth of Debussy, as kind of tribute concert, and he wanted to do as much Debussy pieces that had piano and another instrument. So he invited me to play the Debussy saxophone Rhapsody, but there's also a clarinet Rhapsody that's actually a much better known piece, and we had Kimball Sykes playing the piece, and he sat down with me. We had a bit of lead time. He said it would be really cool if you could write a Rhapsody, like there's already a saxophone Rhapsody and a clarinet Rhapsody, and a third Rhapsody for both instruments together, so we could really, fill out this program with winds. For the strings, we're okay, we have tons, but for the winds, have like this extra piece and go like further, like a step further than Debussy, in the sense that his music does live on through other composers. There is inspiration just seeping out of his body of work. So I wrote this piece in his style. I kind of let my language aside and just kind of absorbed it and played a lot of it. And even though I'm not that good a piano player, I still like opened some scores and looked at some. It takes a while, but it's just absorbing the harmony and his voice leading and saying, oh, okay, this is where he goes, this is where he goes, and then I was ready to write this piece. And it was at a time of my life where I was kind of transitioning between jobs, and I felt kind of free. So there's a lot of, I guess, there's a lot of joy in this piece for me, and serenity.
And virtuosity. There's some incredibly difficult passage work, I think. I have a feeling, some incredibly different passage. In other words, it's a challenging piece for professional musicians to play, to add to their repertoire. That's the bottom line on it. And your story, the story, the background, the backstory about you have created the third Rhapsody, this time bringing the clarinet Rhapsody, if you will, and the sax Rhapsody, at least the two instruments together for a third Rhapsody in homage to Debussy. I mean, it's just an absolutely perfect package. People need to run on by this trio immediately. That's all there is to it. I mean, it's just a beauty. One more, the 2012 Trio Concertante for saxophone, violin, and piano also uses Rose so cleverly. I mean, apparently, a lot, right? I mean, I just can't.
Yeah.
You are a master, and it's kind of a master at. I don't want to say disguise, but I guess really that is for people who are listening. They would never have a clue, frankly. Or am I just a dodo? I mean, it's fabulous the way you.
Well, that one is how can I say a bit more obvious in its rows. At some point, like I always think near the end, I use the row that the piece is based on as a walking bass, and then put a bunch of jazz licks on top of it. And so it's blending the idioms of like jazz and 12-tone music, and it really does work. It really does work, and it ensures some sort of originality. Yeah. And played in a certain style, it does sound like some kind of bebop improv over a walking bass that is also 12 tone.
Yeah, this is Gunther Schuller's third way, if you will. This is these combinations of genres and mediums that no one would even dare doing some years earlier. In other words, all the fussiness and stuffiness is out the window, and composers and musicians are all just dipping into this much vaster, huge world of sound and color and timbre and narrative. Based on using these techniques, finally, maybe not to say correctly, but you have found a technique that works beautifully for you, that dates to whatever, Schoenberg. Yeah.
But for me, I have to enjoy listening to it and playing it. If there's no enjoyment, I did something wrong in the writing. If I don't enjoy it, someone else, there's very little chance that other people will. So I go back to the drawing board, and that's why I don't stick to the rule 100%, because if I do and it's not enjoyable, well, it's not worth it. I mean, music should still be to listen to.
Sure, yeah. So and maybe that's the breaking of that stricture, if that's the right word, that I remember as an undergrad, where the tone row had to be exactly assembled in a certain way. Maybe it was also that it was an elementary, theory class too, and then I think many of us, including the public, said 12-tone row. No, stay away. too unpleasant. You've proven all of that. You've thrown all of that water and the baby out the window over those thoughts. I want to talk just briefly about, because we have one last big one to talk about, but four elements. The four elements, the solo saxophone piece composed, I guess, between 2011 and 2015. This is an absolute stunner for solo saxophone, period. Bottom line, it should be played all over the place. I hope it is, and I hope people are listening when we put this video out.
Well, I'll show you a little something. The French publisher, Gérard Bilodeau, decided to pick it up. So,
Well, we'll, I have a feeling there's probably a link to your publisher, so we'll get that up on the performingartsreview.net page as well. But that's the whole. I mean, I'm a musician. I want people to understand and hear and enjoy and perform this music that you've written. Anyway, four elements. Give me kind of an overview, because it's one of the most incredible pieces for solo saxophone in terms of sound effects and all the rest of it, making use of the instrument.
I would say the four elements, when you were talking about 12-tone, it's one where I use 12-tone a lot. And it's a huge amount, because once you have your row, then you draw up the matrix, and there's four ways to play the row, right? There's the primary and the inversion and the retrograde inversion. And each of the movements is based on one of the ways you can play the primary row. And but then I throw in a lot of other things in it, but there's a lot of 12-tone, and since it's just like one line, sometimes you'll see, there's 12 different ones in there. That's got to be a row of some sort, and you can follow along with the matrix and spot along. This was used here, this was used here. But on top of that, I use a lot of the extended technique tricks I learned along the way, but using them in sort of not necessarily a tonal context, but a way to phrase things so the effect has a place in the phrase. Like the effect substitutes for a dominant or a predominant, leads into what could be a tonic, but there's certainly a direction to these 12-tone rows with the effects, and the thing just drives. Like these movements, even the slower one, still has a drive forward, and the faster ones, they basically drive like heavy metal. Some of them were thought of like serious thrash metal.
Yeah.
And it's kind of seeped into it. But yeah, it uses a lot of extended techniques, a lot of what's called multiphonics on saxophone, where you do get 2, 3, or 4 notes stacked out of this one fingering.
Well, it's a beauty, and it's a masterpiece, and it's a virtuoso work for solo saxophone, and it needs to be performed a whole lot more. And I'm just thinking that this is really a stunning piece for soloists. in a recital, because it essentially shows every magical, what do you call the magical realist capability of this instrument. I mean, it is a fantasy that we hear. In terms of the sound effects and the overtones, and as you said, being the capability of stacking sounds on top of one another, just with that instrument with a reed, it's beautiful. Now, I guess we'd better speak about your breakthrough. I mean, let me bring it up here first. And we didn't even get to the 12-tone rag, where you out and out confess that there's the 12-tone row in this rag, and it's for saxophone and piano, and it's a beaut and a delight. It's just wonderful.
I'll just give you like a 15-second blurb on the 12-tone rag.
Good.
When I just thought, what would be the most sacrilegious use of 12-tone? What is the furthest thing away from it? And I thought about it. It's like, rag. Let's do a ragtime, but using 12-tone, and the main theme is a 12-tone line, and I used like the B theme as another 12-tone line, but as its inversion, and also I used a lot of humorous effects, like an old record, like skipping.
Yeah, it's very, very cute, very funny, very amusing piece.
All these effects, but when you skip the record, you can run 12-tone things behind it, and people don't really notice. And plus, in the piano, there's not much 12-tone. It's very, very much.
Yeah. Like as I said, the incredibly clever, lots of fun, very entertaining, and then all the compositional craft. I guess you're a master of 12-tone technique, basically. I have a feeling that's what we're going to have to call you. Is that okay? Will Ottawa approve? Will the government be okay with that? Now let's talk about another piece of business here on this CD, which tops it off. Two pieces that absolutely top off the CD and make it such that people should run out and buy it just for these two pieces, frankly. This is the use of the instrument, the theremin. I'm going to give you the difficulty of trying to recreate what that creature is. I've seen it on video. I'm sure many musicians have seen it demonstrated, in videos from the 50s or 60s or so. The theremin, this amazing kind of pre-electronic invention from what, the 30s or 40s or something? It was so brilliant, or earlier.
The 20s.
The 20s. Amazing. The 20s. And then how people, as I mentioned off camera, in my view, people kind of played with it like it was a toy, a fun thing, and then it's forgotten. You have taken that instrument, the theremin, and combined it with your composition and your other pieces to create two marvelous, stunning, magical pieces. Through the Ethereal Gate, indeed. And I want you to it's in the program note, but tell us about this concept of Through the Ethereal Gate, and the second piece, On the Shores of Eternity. And when I first heard On the Shores of Eternity, that's the last track on the disc, I was instantly transported. I mean, I was instantly transported to a magical place that was a beach. You mentioned it, I think, in your program notes. Now that's how could this instrument have been, pushed out the back door for all these years and ignored? I think everybody is ready now for electronic music, for all the rest of it. Tell us about Ethereal Gate, your discovery of theremin, how you use it. You explain it, but I'm trying to figure out how a guy can play the saxophone and do crazy stuff with his hand.
So the theremin I use isn't 100% classic theremin, where a normal theremin has a pitch antenna that's vertical and a volume antenna that's horizontal, and you can control articulation and intensity here, and then pitch over here. My theremin is a pitch only instrument that's actually referred to as a zeppelin, and it's a zeppelin because it's a kind of theremin that Jimmy Page used in Led Zeppelin for some improvisation kind of things, but since a theremin is a lot of trouble to learn, a zeppelin is more simple. And the reason I bought one is that I was writing a piece for a thereminist in the Netherlands, and he actually got me onto the theremin. We were playing a concert together. His name is Thorwald Jorgensen. It's an unbelievable virtuoso of theremin, by the way, unbelievable. And we got talking, and I was playing some of my own music in this concert. He said, "Well, maybe you should write music for theremin." And I said, "Okay, well, let's talk about that." And in the process, I bought myself a theremin to figure out, how to write music and how this thing works and the limitations. And when I got this theremin, I thought, oh, there's a piece by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen for soprano sax, for solo soprano sax, where he calls you to move the instrument and point it in different directions. And I thought, I'm going to be the cool guy who puts the theremin in the middle and do the Stockhausen and move through the pitch field with the soprano sax and have like Stockhausen 2.0, like go much further. And this experiment was a total disaster, massive disaster. The first time I swing the instrument, I hit the antenna, the theremin falls over. It's brand new, I almost broke it. I dented the side of my bell. And it's like, okay, this is just not going to work. It was kind of hurting my neck too, so I had to figure out a system where, well, first of all, the Stockhausen, I had to forget about it. And second, I'm like, well, this could work, but I need to figure out a system. So instead of having the theremin like this, I put it on a hinge on top of a mic stand and lowered the whole thing 90 degrees. So now I have the pitch antenna like this, and on soprano saxophone, I can move vertically easily, and it's my right hand that goes right under the antenna, and then I can go into and out of the pitch field and control the theremin's pitch while playing on soprano, depending on the vertical axis of the instrument. And that opened a world of possibilities, because I realized that if I, like all the effects I have in the four elements, if I take some of those and port them over to this new theremin piece, all the trilling, everything that happens into the right hand, the theremin kind of mirrors it. So the theremin feels when I'm trilling and trills itself. And then if I'm trilling here, I get two notes. But if I start moving here, the theremin keeps trilling but changes notes. So there's a bunch of possibilities. There's also pitch matching, where I'll play a note and then go from under the pitch field into the pitch field and find where I am with the theremin, and then get a unison or get an octave, and then I can find with the theremin, do an interval or kind of lock in, and then change the intervals with the saxophone. But basically it becomes kind of a duet that I can do. And through the ethereal gate, the name of it, I didn't have the name before I did the initial experiment of being out of the pitch field and clicking into it, and that's the first time you hear the theremin on the CD, and there is so much power in this ascending glissando going, and the first time I did it, it's like I opened this gate into an invisible world. It's like seeing a new color. It's like seeing off the spectrum for the first time and saying, all this is possible. It's been right there in front of us. We just didn't try it yet. And that's that. I felt like I stepped through this gate and there was another world of possibilities that happened instantaneously. Like in my head, it's just, okay, well, the world has changed. It can never be the same anymore, because there's this possibility that's basically endless, and I feel I barely scratched the surface. But I needed to write this one piece to cement my claim to this invention, I guess. I've never seen anyone else do it.
So Through the Ethereal Gate is the first.
Yeah.
Is it first? It predates the other piece, On the Shores of Eternity.
Yes.
Can you? We're kind of running a little tight, but can you kind of give me an idea of how? If I understand you correctly, you discovered this. You made another big discovery, and you're playing with it. And then the second piece comes up. How did you sort of change your? How did you go further in the use of the instrument for the second piece, On the Shores of Eternity?
Well, then what I realized is that the theremin comes out in the same patch chord an electric guitar comes out. So I started hooking it up to electric guitar pedals, effect pedals, and some of them react really well, some of them don't react well at all. But the delay pedals, the octave pedals, and I have, like, for the Shores of Eternity, I have basically a sound breaking machine, which is like a white noise. So it breaks up the signal, and you put some delay and lower the octave, and it sounds just like a wave crashing on a beach. And after that, you can get a wind. With a combination of the pedal board, you can get a kind of a whale song. There's all these possibilities that really worked out. But I had to invest in a lot of pedals, a lot of electric guitar pedals, which aren't cheap. the theremin might have been the cheapest part of the whole rig.
So in other words, you got hooked.
Yeah.
And by the way, is there a future, or was this just a lark? I'm being rude and crude, but there has to
No,
be a future here. You have to see that you've got something going here.
there's definitely a future. I've been busy with a couple of other projects, but I'm certainly looking forward to going back to it and going further with it. And there's definitely a visual component that I'd love to add. But for me, everything has to happen in real time. Like when I play it, nothing can be pre-recorded. All the effects happen in real time, and I would like a visual representation with projectors of what's happening to the sound waves in real time.
I have another person I'm going to turn you on to. Another person, Stephen Malinowski, who is a master of this sort of thing of making visual images to match
I've
sound.
seen his YouTube things. I've seen his WC. I've seen it.
And Small World, we've known each other since high school in Santa Barbara.
Really?
Steve, yeah. So, and as you know, I'm going to introduce you to, or introduce your music to some new friends in New York City that are really saxophone people. So anyway, enough of that. Not that I'm tossing things around, but it's such a small world. It's just so amazing. But yeah, Stephen Malinowski would be perfect I think, in terms of what you've just described about what you're kind of looking for as a visual. What's next? You've indicated you're not done with theremin yet, but what you mentioned a couple projects in the works. Are they just completely on the other side of the spectrum of what we have on the CD, or what?
Well, I've just completed a commission for orchestra that might be premiered sometime next year. That's still in negotiation, but it's called On the Shores of the St. Lawrence, and it's not on the shores of eternity. It's something completely different. It's kind of like an impressionistic 10-minute overture with blends of folk and I set out to write the Canadian Moldau. With this piece, so I finished that recently. I had a commission for solo saxophone that I finished recently, and now there's this theremin thing I want to do. But I'm planning on recording another CD, not this summer, the next one. Another whack of my works, maybe another 10 pieces I've written, because I'm kind of backlogged. I've written a lot more than you have on the CD.
Yeah, well, I kind of figured that, but and that's also the way to get it out. They're expensive, but they are greeting cards. I mean, CDs. You know.
Oh.
You know, that is the whole point. And I hope I'm going to be able to be of some help, some small help. And by the way, as I mentioned to people, you know, we're not really trying to sell an extra 3 or 4 CDs. Nobody's going to get rich on that one. We're trying to introduce the world to you as a composer, as a lecturer, as a workshop leader, that kind of thing. That's my purpose, and to let other professional musicians know about you. Now, I'm sure many do. So I hope I'm the only ninny in the crowd. But I'm just blown away by your music. It's fabulous stuff. We're going to have to end. I have been speaking in Ottawa with Victor Herbietlive, composer, classical saxophonist, a wonderful Centre Disc Canadian release, The Road to the Ethereal Gate. It's a beauty. I'm going to put it up, and with our video and everything else, lots of stuff to keep visitors occupied at your page, and so they can get a good idea of who you are and what your music sounds like. Victor, great pleasure chatting with you. Thanks very much for giving me some of your evening in Ottawa, and perhaps we'll chat again when you finish that next project in a couple of years, that next CD project.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sure. Okay. Bye-bye. Hang on, let me
Bye.
turn.